Do you know what it feels like when your hands won't stop shaking, even after you've put the mop away? Not from the cold, though God knows it was cold enough in that hospital basement at 2 in the morning. I mean the kind of shaking that comes from somewhere deeper, from the part of you that knows the truth but hasn't figured out how to live with it yet. That was me, 67 years old, mopping floors in the basement laundry room of St. Carver Medical Center, while my only son, was living in a house I had paid for, running a restaurant I had funded, and telling his friends his father was retired. My name is Donald Marsh, and I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story, friends. I need you to understand that I was not a weak man. I was not a fool. I was a father who loved his child so completely that I couldn't see what was right in front of me until the evidence was sitting in my own 2 hands. Let me take you back to the beginning. I worked for 38 years as a pipe fitter for a municipal water authority in western Pennsylvania. It was not glamorous work. It was underground, literally. I spent most of my career in holes in the ground, in crawl spaces under old buildings, in utility tunnels that smelled like rust and standing water. I wore out more pairs of work boots than I can count. My knees told the story of every job I'd ever done, a story written in cartilage damage and scar tissue. But I was proud of that work. I was proud because I did it honestly, and I did it well, and every paycheck I brought home was clean. My wife, Carol, she was a bookkeeper for a small dental practice for 22 years. She was meticulous with money. 30, she kept a little green ledger, an actual paper ledger where she tracked every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. When our son, Kevin, was born, she started a second ledger just for him, his college fund, his future. She wrote Kevin's tomorrow on the cover in her careful, looping handwriting, and she never missed a deposit, not once in 18 years. Kevin grew up knowing he was loved. Maybe that was the problem. Not the love itself, but the way we showed it, which was to give, and never once ask him to account for what he received. He was a bright kid, genuinely bright. He had Carol's head for numbers and my stubbornness. But he had something neither of us had, which was an appetite for the finer things. He wanted the name-brand shoes when his classmates wore knockoffs. He wanted the newer car when he turned 16. He wanted to go to a university 3 states away because a kid he admired had gone there, not because of any academic program. We gave him all of it. Carol never complained. She adjusted the ledger. She moved numbers around. She was a magician with a tight budget, and she loved performing that trick for her son. Kevin graduated and got a job in marketing for a mid-sized company in Charlotte, North Carolina. He was good at it. Charming, quick, creative, and he called us every Sunday, told us about his apartment, his coworkers, his plans. Those phone calls were the best part of Carol's week. That she would sit in the kitchen with her coffee, laughing at his stories, and she glowed. She genuinely glowed. Then Carol got sick. It was pancreatic cancer. They found it late, the way they usually do with that particular cruelty. She had 14 months, from diagnosis to the end. I took early retirement from the water authority to take care of her. I was 61. The pension was smaller than it would have been if I'd worked 5 more years. But I never questioned that decision for a single second. I would have paid any price to be the one holding her hand during those months. Kevin came home when she was first diagnosed. He was there for a week, and he was attentive and genuinely heartbroken. When he left to go back to Charlotte, he hugged me at the door and said, "Dad, whatever you need, I'm here." I believed him completely. Carol passed on a Tuesday morning in April. The magnolias in the front yard were blooming. She always loved those trees. In the months after she died, I was adrift. 62 years old, living alone in a 4-bedroom house, eating cereal for dinner, watching the news with the volume too loud because the silence without her was unbearable. Kevin called, but the calls got shorter. He was busy. Life moves fast when you're 34 and ambitious, and the grief is someone else's to carry. I understood. I told myself I understood. About 8 months after Carol died, Kevin came home for a long weekend. He seemed different, energized, fizzing with something. On Saturday evening, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, and he laid it all out. He had an idea. A restaurant. Not just any restaurant, a farm-to-table concept in a revitalized neighborhood of Charlotte that was pulling in young professionals, young families, people with money to spend and values to perform. He had a location. He had a menu concept worked out with a chef friend of his. He had a name, Soil and Table. He slid a folder across the kitchen table to me. There were photographs of the location, printed projections, a market analysis. It looked professional. It looked real. It looked real. It looked real. It looked real. Dad, he said, leaning forward with those eyes that looked exactly like Carol's, this is the moment. If I don't move on this now, someone else will. The neighborhood is changing fast. In 2 years, that space will cost 3 times what it costs today. I asked the right questions. I asked about investors. He said he had 2 lined up, a college friend and a guy from his marketing network, but they were only covering a portion of the costs. He needed a lead investor to anchor the deal. How much? I asked. He told me. It was substantial. It was, in fact, almost exactly the amount sitting in the joint savings account that Carol and I had spent our lives building. The money that was supposed to carry me through retirement. The money Carol had managed with her green ledger. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded. He was respectful about it. He didn't push. He left that folder on the kitchen table and flew back to Charlotte on Sunday. I sat with that folder for 2 weeks. I called my brother, Ray, who told me to be careful. I called my old foreman, Pete, who said the restaurant business was a graveyard for other people's money. I went back and forth so many times I wore a groove in my own thinking. But Kevin was my son, Carol's son. He was all I had left of her, in a way. When I looked at him, I saw her optimism, her faith in people, her belief that love was an investment that always paid back. And I thought, what am I saving this money for anyway? I'm 62 years old with bad knees and no one to travel with. If I can give my son the foundation Carol would have wanted him to have, isn't that what the money is for? I called him. I said yes. I transferred the funds. The next 18 months were the best of our relationship since his childhood. Kevin called me twice a week. He sent photos of the build-out, the tables being installed, the kitchen equipment arriving. He sent me a picture of the sign going up, Soil and Table, in clean serif letters on reclaimed wood. I printed that photo and put it on the refrigerator. The restaurant opened and it was a hit. Not immediately. The first 3 months were slow, the way new restaurants always are, but by month 6, it was getting written up in local food blogs, then a Charlotte magazine, then a brief mention in a regional travel feature. Kevin texted me a photo of a line out the door on a Friday night. Dad, we did it, he wrote. It says, I was so proud, I cried. Standing in Carol's kitchen, alone, I cried like a child. But here is where the story changes. And here is where I tell you about the year I don't talk about. The calls started to taper off again around the 2-year mark. Kevin was busy, I told myself. Running a successful restaurant is all-consuming. I didn't push. I didn't want to be that father, the needy one, the one who guilts his adult son for not calling enough. Meanwhile, my pension was not stretching the way I had hoped. Utility bills, property taxes, a new water heater, a car repair, the ordinary ambushes of a life lived in an aging house. I found myself watching the bank balance more closely than I ever had when Carol was alive. She had been the one who saw the numbers clearly. Without her, I had been operating on faith and estimation, and faith and estimation are not a financial strategy. By the time I was 65, I was in trouble. Real trouble. Not homeless, tomorrow trouble, but the grinding, humiliating trouble of a man who can no longer afford to live the life he built, who is eating generic brand everything and keeping the heat at 61 degrees in February to keep the bill manageable. I called Kevin. I told him things were tighter than I had expected. I told him that the investment I'd made in the restaurant. I was wondering about the repayment timeline we had discussed. He had mentioned repaying me once the business was stable. There was a pause on the phone, the kind of pause that has a shape to it. Dad, he said, carefully, the restaurant is doing well, but we've been reinvesting everything back into the business. You don't just pull capital out of a growing operation. That's not how it works. I said I understood that. I said I just needed some idea of when. I can't give you a number right now, he said. I don't want to promise something I can't guarantee. You wouldn't want me to do that, right? I said right. I said I wouldn't want that. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I called the county workforce office. I was 65 years old, and I needed a job. The hospital job was the only thing I could get that didn't require standing for 8-hour shifts on a retail floor, which my knees couldn't handle. The basement laundry and sanitation crew at St. Carver had overnight shifts, less time on your feet, more rolling equipment on wheels. The pay was barely above minimum wage. I drove to work at 11 at night and came home at 7 in the morning, and I slept through the days in Carol's quiet house. The magnolias blooming and dropping and blooming again outside the window. I did not tell Kevin. I want you to understand that. I did not tell my son I was mopping floors in a hospital basement at midnight because I was ashamed. And I was ashamed not for myself, but for him. For what it would mean about who he had become. A man from my crew, a young Haitian guy named Thierry, used to bring in homemade bread on Thursdays. He'd set it on the break room table and we'd all eat it at 3 in the morning while the industrial dryers ran. He asked me once why I was there, a man my age. I told him I was staying active. He nodded, like he believed me. Maybe he did. People are kind that way. The moment everything broke open was a Wednesday in November. I had driven to Charlotte to surprise Kevin for his birthday. I hadn't told him I was coming. It was meant to be a good surprise. A father showing up with a cake box from the bakery his mother used to love. I had the cake on the passenger seat. I was feeling, for the first time in months, almost like myself. I found a parking spot half a block from his apartment building and walked up to ring the buzzer. While I was waiting, I glanced down the street, and there was Kevin, coming out of a coffee shop with a woman I didn't recognize and another man. They were laughing, all three of them. Kevin was wearing a coat I had never seen, a good coat. A heavy wool coat that costs real money. He looked relaxed and well and prosperous. €5. The backed it is wand. He saw me. His face did something complicated. He smiled, but the smile arrived a half-second too late. Dad, what are you doing here? We went up to his apartment. It was a new apartment he hadn't mentioned moving. Bigger than the last one. A real dining room table. Not the folding one he'd had for years. Art on the walls. He offered me a drink, and I sat on his new couch, and I looked around and I said, very quietly, Kevin, things look like they're going well. The restaurant's had a great quarter, he said. That's wonderful, I said. Something in my voice must have changed the temperature in the room. He put his glass down. Dad, I know what you're going to ask. I'm not asking anything, I said. I'm just noticing. The business needs its capital, he said, the same words as before, worn smooth with repetition. I can't take money out of the operation. If I do that, the whole thing could destabilize. You put money in as an investor. Dad, investors don't always get paid back on a timeline. That's the risk. The risk. I looked at my son. I looked at Carol's eyes in a stranger's face. And I said, Kevin, I'm working nights at the hospital. Sanitation. I have been for 8 months. I can't make my property tax payment in January. He stared at me. Why didn't you tell me? He said. And I said, because I was ashamed of what it would mean about you. There was a silence in that apartment that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Kevin looked down at the floor. He didn't say, he was sorry. He said, Dad, I didn't know things were that bad. I thought you had other savings. I gave you the other savings. I said, that money went into the business. He said, it's not like I spent it on myself. Property. I looked at that coat hanging by the door. I looked at the art on the walls. I drove home that night with the cake still in the box. I didn't give it to him. I don't know why I didn't, some instinct. I put it on the passenger seat and I drove 4 hours back to Pennsylvania and I ate 2 pieces of it alone at the kitchen table at midnight, and I thought about Carol, and I thought about what she would have done, and I thought about what I was going to do. The answer came to me slowly, the way the right answers usually do. The first thing I did was call my brother, Ray. This time I told him everything, the hospital job, the money, Kevin's apartment, the coat. Ray was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Don, You need to talk to someone who knows the law. I found a legal aid office that worked with seniors on financial matters. The attorney I met with, a woman named Miss Elaine Croft, had the kind of steady, practical energy that I needed in that moment. I laid out the situation for her. The money transferred from the joint savings account, which was now solely mine after Carol's death. The informal agreement about repayment. The conversation in Kevin's apartment. She asked me several questions. Had I signed anything? I had not. S. Had the transfer been documented as a loan? S. It had not. It was a bank transfer with no attached paperwork, because Kevin was my son and I had not thought to treat my son like a counterparty in a business transaction. That makes things difficult, she said, but not impossible. You have a record of the transfer. You have the text messages and calls in which he acknowledged the investment. And you have something else. And. She leaned forward slightly. You have the fact that you are a senior citizen on a fixed income who is currently working a night cleaning job to survive, while your son is expanding his lifestyle. If this went in front of a judge, the optics would not be favorable to him. She helped me draft a formal demand letter, a legal document signed by her office, laying out the facts of the transfer, the reasonable expectation of repayment, and the formal notice that if no repayment plan was established within 30 days, I would pursue the matter through civil court. Kevin called me the night he received it. He was not the calm, measured man from the Charlotte apartment. He was shaking. Dad, what is this? You're taking me to court? Your own son. I'm asking you to honor an agreement, I said. That's what the letter says. I can't believe you did this. After everything, Mom and I, after everything, this family, Kevin. My voice was steady. I surprised myself. I am 67 years old. I mop floors at midnight. I kept the heat at 61 degrees. All last winter. I ate cereal for dinner more nights than I want to count. I am not doing this to hurt you. I am doing this because I cannot survive without it. A long silence. I didn't know it was that bad, he said. His voice had changed. Younger. Scared. You didn't ask, I said, but I'm telling you now. What happened next surprised me. Kevin asked for 2 weeks. He said he needed to talk to his business partners. His accountant. He said he would call me back. And he did call back 11 days later. He had spoken to his investors, the real ones, the college friend and the marketing contact. Apparently my name had come up before in those conversations. Apparently Kevin had told them, when they first set the business up, that his lead investor me had gifted him the money outright and that there were no repayment obligations. His partners had structured their own arrangements under that assumption. When Kevin now told them the truth, that it had been a loan, that his father was working a night job and could not afford his property taxes, the college friend, a decent man, apparently was furious. This I did not know until later. What I knew at the time was that Kevin arranged for me to receive a wire transfer, a meaningful portion of what I had originally given him. Not all of it. He was genuinely unable to return all of it without destroying the business. But enough to pay the January tax bill. Enough to get the heat up to a reasonable temperature. Enough for me to give notice at the hospital. My last shift at St. Carver was a Thursday. Thierry brought his bread. I ate 2 slices, and I told him I was moving on. He shook my hand with both of his and said, God bless you, Mr. Don. I drove home in the early gray morning, and I sat in Carol's kitchen, and I let myself feel it, the exhaustion, the grief, the strange thin light of something that wasn't quite relief but was in the same neighborhood. But the story wasn't over. And this is the part I want you to pay attention to, friends, because this is the part that matters. A few months later, I got a call from Kevin's business partner, the college friend, whose name was Stephen. He introduced himself carefully, explained how he'd gotten my number. He said he wanted to meet. He drove up to Pennsylvania on a Saturday and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Kevin had laid out the soil and table folder 3 years before. Stephen told me that when Kevin had disclosed the truth about my loan, he and the other partner had done a full audit of the business finances. What they found had not made Kevin look good. He had been drawing a personal salary from the business that was significantly higher than what had been disclosed to his partners. He had been expensing personal costs through the business accounts. End quote. The new apartment in Charlotte, a portion of the furnishings, all of it had passed through business accounts in ways that would not survive an accountant's scrutiny. Stephen was not asking for my help. He was giving me information, and he said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "Mr. Marsh, I think you should know that your son is a smart man who convinced himself that loving people means you're allowed to take from them. That's a dangerous idea. I hope he figures out that it isn't true." The partners restructured the business agreement. Kike partners. Kevin's salary was adjusted. His access to discretionary accounts was restricted. He retained his share of the business, but he was no longer running it the way he had been. He stayed in Charlotte. The restaurant stayed open. It was a legitimately good restaurant, whatever else you could say about the man running it. Kevin came to see me in the spring. He drove up unannounced, the way I had driven to Charlotte that November. I opened the door and there he was, standing on the porch, looking like he hadn't slept well in months. He had a casserole dish in his hands. And he'd made the baked ziti that Carol used to make. From the index card she'd written the recipe on 40 years ago, a card he must have kept. I let him in. We ate at the kitchen table without saying very much. He washed the dishes after. Then we sat in the living room, in the same chairs where I used to read to him when he was small, and he told me he was sorry. Not the performed sorry of someone trying to end a conflict, but the raw, plainly stated sorry of someone who has been forced to see himself clearly and does not like what he saw. He said, "I told myself I was building something for both of us. I told myself you were an investor, not a father who'd given me everything. I made up a story that let me take from you without feeling like I was taking. I don't know when I started doing that, but I did it, and I'm sorry, Dad. I'm genuinely sorry." I did not tell him it was all right, because it wasn't, entirely. Some things aren't all right, they are simply over, survived, weathered. What I told him was that I was glad he could see it, and that his mother would have wanted us both to find a way through it. He nodded. He was crying, but quietly, the way adults cry when they're trying not to. I am 68 now. I retired properly, this time. The repayment from Kevin, combined with my pension and some careful adjustments to how I live, is enough. It isn't the retirement Carol and I had planned. There is no travel. There is no extra. But the heat is on, and the property taxes are paid, and I sleep at night in an actual bed, not a motel room, not a recliner, not sitting up because my back is too wrecked to lie down after 8 hours with a mop. Kevin and I talk every Sunday. The calls are not like the old calls. They're more careful, more deliberate, the way things are between people who have had to rebuild trust from a lower foundation. But they are real, more real in some ways than the easy calls we used to have when everything was flowing in one direction and neither of us had to reckon with what that meant. My neighbor's boy, a teenager named Eli, has been mowing my lawn for 2 summers. Last week he asked me what I did before I retired. I told him I was a pipe fitter, and then I told him I was a janitor, and I said both things in the same tone of voice with the same degree of pride. He thought about that for a second. Then he asked which one I liked better. I said the second one taught me more. I still have Carol's green ledger. I keep it in the drawer by the kitchen sink. It's so. The last entries in it are from the month before she got sick. Routine figures, grocery numbers, the Kevin column, always the Kevin column. Sometime in the year after she died, I started keeping my own ledger. Same format, same column headers, her handwriting on the cover and mine inside. I wrote my own name at the top of the account column. Just mine. For the first time in 40 years. Just mine. Friends, I have learned something I want to leave you with. The people who can hurt you the most are the ones you have given everything to. Not because they are evil. My son is not evil, but because love, when it's only flowing in one direction for long enough, stops looking like love to the person receiving it. It starts to look like a resource, like something they can draw on indefinitely without the meter ever running out. You have to let them see the meter. You have to show them, clearly and without apology, that there is a cost to how they have lived and that you are not willing to pay it anymore. I am 68 years old. I worked in a hospital basement at midnight. I am still standing, and I will tell you something: I sleep better now than I have in years.